that situation in Texas is unbelievably confusing now, because what has happened is a request to vacate the stay to the Supreme Court yesterday by the Biden administration was denied. Everybody was celebrating a win until the Fifth Circuit last night, late or even this morning, vacated that and said, no more stay. We're dissolving the stay, and the case is being argued today, which indicates to me that Texas is going to lose.
Denying enforcement of the Texas ability to enforce immigration laws. They tried to do something unique by utilizing their own law enforcement. Of course, you have to remember back to the Arizona case on SB 1070, where the Supreme Court said no, unless the federal government basically gives you the green light, deputizes your local authorities to do these jobs, even if it's a horrendous situation, you as the state are not able to utilize your resources. And so I think as this case makes its way up through the court system, they're going to have to look at SB 1070, and you might get another review by the U.S. Supreme Court of whether or not that was the right interpretation of Article 1. There's another, interesting issue here, though, that in the law, it does allow for more state action if you can qualify what's happening as an invasion.
Correct.
And right now, when you think about how many Americans have been killed by fentanyl, the amount of people who are crossing the border illegally into Texas, I mean, that to me is kind of like the definition of an invasion, because it actually is killing people. People are losing their lives. They're not killing with guns. They're killing with drugs.
The Biden administration was saying, listen, the Fifth Circuit put in place an administrative stay which allowed the law of Texas to be enforced. That law makes it a state crime to cross the Texas-Mexico border between ports of entry. If a police officer believes they have evidence that a person illegally crossed the Rio Grande, that person be charged with a Class B misdemeanor, which carries punishment up to 6 months in jail. For subsequent offenses, the person can be charged with second-degree felonies, facing up to 20 years in prison. If the migrant is convicted and has served their sentence, a judge will require to order the police to transfer them back to the point of entry. So as of yesterday, that law was still in place. As of today, it's not. Because while the Supreme Court denied the request of the Biden administration for a stay, what happened today was the Fifth Circuit, before oral argument, this is unheard of, this morning issued an order dissolving the administrative stay that they had put in place. Different panel, and included a dissent from a judge appointed by President Trump. Another judge was appointed by Obama and Bush, and those two voted that the stay be lifted. So this is going to end up right back at the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's creating chaos at the border, more legal chaos in all of this.
The appeals court putting the Texas immigration law back on hold. They will then want to appeal this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court initially halted the law. So, I mean, you've got here again another major constitutional case potentially heading to the Supreme Court, and a chance for them to look at SB 1070 in light of the illegal immigration we are facing today and the consequences, not just of the amount of people coming and of the resources where these towns and the crime, but also of the amount of Americans that have died that you can directly tie to illegal immigration.
There is a provision in the Constitution that says if a state is being invaded,
yes,
which this constitutes an
Article
invasion.
1, Section 10.
Right. If the state is being invaded. What's interesting, and Don Parsons from our team found this, in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, and talks about no state shall, without the consent of Congress, basically control the border. And it talks about compacts with other state foreign powers. But there's a provision that says, unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. I think Texas needs to argue that provision of the Constitution. It is an invasion. Now, Don said, based on the research he's done, the invasion has to have a set of where there's actual harm or hostility. I think the fentanyl aspect of this and the sex trafficking is that, but the fentanyl particularly is harm because that's murder and death. I think the state of Texas needs to modify their arguments, if they haven't already, and include that provision. Maybe they have, but that's headed back to the Supreme Court of the United States as well.
Harm, it's physical harm.
Yeah.
You got the number one killer of Americans between 18 and 45 because of fentanyl. Fentanyl that is coming primarily across the southern border. You have the gang violence coming across the southern border. You have the economic toll in the cities, but you also have, again, the resources of these cities being completely depleted. The Biden administration did not have to stop it. The Supreme Court didn't say, Tulsi, that the Biden administration, that Texas can't do this. They only cannot do it if the Biden administration tells them to stop. So even when it's working and a state is willing to put up its own resources, this administration is willing to tell them, no, you can't help. You've got to let the people flow into your state with the crime, with the drugs, and with the people overwhelming your hospitals, your schools, and your economies.
That's really where we, the people, should be asking questions and demanding answers from the Biden-Harris administration on why that is. They are clearly failing to fulfill their responsibility of securing our country. And the fact that they are getting in the way of and demanding a cease and desist from states who are dealing with this mass illegal immigration, people unvetted from all parts of the world streaming across our borders by the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions. Why is it that the Biden-Harris administration is actively, they're not even just saying, hey, guys, we need you to stop. They are actively getting in the way of Governor Abbott and his efforts to secure Texas. For example, they are actively turning a blind eye. This is such a huge problem. There are political motives behind this on the Biden-Harris administration's part, and we cannot allow them to continue to make our country less secure, put us at risk, and incur the kind of hardship and damage that we are incurring because of their open border policy.
We pointed this out earlier. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the Constitution, which does require a state to have consent of Congress for various things like what they're trying to do in Texas. But it says, unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. And Tulsi, to me, they are being invaded. And the invasion, also, the courts have said, has to include an element of either violence or death. And we've got this fentanyl deaths that are unprecedented. So we have an invasion going on our border, and the states are just trying to protect their citizens.
Yes, and there are, unfortunately, so many cases of imminent danger, both to people and their property, as a direct result of these open borders. I think the recent ruling stating that those who break our laws by illegally entering our country are now afforded some kind of Second Amendment right to own firearms is egregious and offensive, even as many state governments and the federal government continue to crack down on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens in this country, turning us into felons. My home state of Hawaii right now, unfortunately, the state legislature is pushing a bill that would do just that would turn my husband and I and many other law-abiding gun owners into felons. And yet someone who's entered our country illegally, committed that crime, is now allowed to be armed.
It's so bizarre. You can't even put it in any kind of context where it makes sense.